in my 20s, I had thankfully, some misdiagnosis. I come from a family of doctors. All my family, my father, my grandfather, my father taught at USC Medical School. I was pre-med at UCSD, and I didn't have the academic focus to stay with it in that way. But I ended up in my mid-20s. I was diagnosed with an enlarged liver and spleen, and thankfully it was a misdiagnosis. And from that point, I started to think of other ways that the medical system had failed and been incorrect. Number one, and number two, my mother unfortunately had multiple sclerosis, and I grew up with her, seeing her slowly debilitate physically as a young boy, and then slowly she couldn't walk, and then she lost movement of pretty much all her body. But thank God her head was clean and clear. It didn't affect that, but it was very challenging for her, obviously. And when the doctors gave her 6 months to live in 1981, when I was at UCSD and I had to come up to UCLA Medical School, at hospital and I got that 6 months maximum talk from the doctor. And thank God she lived 17 years after that. And she had a double pneumonia. A lot of MS people get pneumonia. She had to have a tracheotomy, a gastrectomy, and they didn't think she would make it, obviously, but she did. And not only she did, she got to see me get married. She got to see her grandchildren. And so these things were always in my mind, that the Western system was certainly flawed in healing her. I mean, she was almost a guinea pig for spinal taps and things like this, and new things that really never worked. And so in that period of time, with all these things going on in my head, I said, there's got to be another way. God created a planet of such plentiful beauty, and there has to be a way that an alternative way to go. And that's when I started I met somebody named Meir Abacera, who was a student in macrobiotics under Kushi, who was one of the founders, and started to discuss changing my diet at that point for my own health. And I just got on this pathway of just trying to learn whatever I could. And I started to learn homeopathy. I started to learn herbal medicine. I just became into the whole thing. And then when I had my kids, and when my first son was in nursery school and he came home with rashes from eating some junk at the school, I said, why don't they have the healthy snacks in schools? And that's how my first company started. I called schools and I said, listen, why don't you get some healthy snacks? And that's how You Are What You Eat started. And then we ended up bringing products it blossomed from schools to the more of the mass market, and that's how that company started. But the vision was to always try to put healthier products in available for kids and in schools. So I feel very, very blessed, and in the sense that when I start my seminars, I always use two words in this field, and the two words are what works. Because I don't feel I'm pigeonholed. You spoke about the allopathic world. I don't feel I'm pigeonholed like doctors in different worlds get. Now, I respect, for instance, I respect Sean Baker and Anthony Chaffee and Paul Saladino. Paul changed his views a lot. Anthony's way on the, vegetables hurt him. But what I always say, maybe they don't hurt everybody else, So what I'm trying to say, I'm very, very sympathetic and connected to the carnivore world. And I believe it did a lot of good. And it certainly, when I started to learn about it a while back, it certainly turned my whole other world upside down. And I said, I have to be, but I was always open to that. And I think you see a real, in Sean Baker, he's like, I do this. I'm not forcing anybody to do it, but I saw people heal. And when you see people heal, that's what what should work. And the studies, when you spoke earlier, it's interesting when I think we spoke off the air, but I believe so much more in anecdotal studies in the world of the medical field and health field than the controlled blind studies. And I'll tell you why. I had many clients, personal clients, that I would try to change their diet. And they're paying me good money. And they basically couldn't even hold that folk for a week. You know, I'd come back the next week. I did it for 2 days. It's so hard. They talk about 30-day study that people only ate like this. I can't even imagine that they could keep to it or whatever else they snuck in. So to say that they really were in a double-blind study that they kept to really like this, I find that very, very suspect. On the other hand, when you see somebody, I just saw a young kid a couple months ago. We were on a little journey, and I met somebody, and he had Crohn's disease in the early 20s, and nothing. He went to doctors for years, nothing did anything. He changed his diet to basically raw meat, maybe a little bit cooked, and some fruit, and he healed. And now he's doing great. He's strong. He's doing Tai Chi, and he's completely healed. Not even a little trace. So these stories come up all the time, and you hear it, and you see it very, very clearly. One of the things when I started to learn in the carnivore world, I would look at Anthony Chaffee and Paul Saladino and Sean Baker and Ken Berry, but what was amazing was the comments on YouTube. Hundreds and hundreds. I'm 67. I was 180, 244 pounds. I had high blood this, and I changed, and I'm like this. One after the next, one after the next. So you start to say, these aren't fake people. This really works. So that's my theme in all this. So I don't try to get pigeonholed where somebody says, this is the way you have to do it, and you become dogmatic. If something works, fantastic. We are wired differently. And if somebody thinks that everyone's blood pressure should be 120/80, to me, that's insanity. That's like saying everybody should be 6'5", 285 pounds. Everybody's wired differently. Okay, you can have a guide that's what it should be, but people are digest things differently. People have a proclivity for certain things. And also the joy of family and eating and friends also plays a factor in health. And that's why the Italians, I think, they can pour down bottles of wine and pasta, and they're living healthy and well into their, older ages. So I think that's a picture of how I would see things.